When we talk about accelerating succession, this is particularly relevant to these questions that have been coming up about these plants who I'm now going to need to introduce another terminology around, which I mentioned to you before, which is this notion of exotic invasive is a term that goes back to Nazism and was really coined by the fascists and was part of their agenda to get people to be comfortable with the notion that you kill what is not native. You know, you kill it. And so you want to realize that this language is fascist language. Exotic invasive, it's a plant. It's not invasive, that's a human behavioral characteristic. So the terms that we like to use that we think are more botanical, I mean people like Theodopoulos, who wrote an interesting book called Exotic Invasives, The Myth of a Pseudoscience, and also Dave Jackie and several other permaculture designers. The terms we're using are opportunist, dispersive, and expansive. So those words we want to introduce as an offering to substitute terms like exotic invasive, because we feel that those terms, first of all, aren't very descriptive. That it's more descriptive to talk about, so this plant is an opportunist. This plant disperses incredibly easily. How does it disperse? Is it dispersed by seed? Is it dispersed by root? How's it dispersing? And then that it's expansive, so it does it really fast. So it's not like we're trying to shroud the reality of these plants. They're opportunist, dispersive expansion. You know, they know how to move into an area and do their thing and proliferate themselves. Over and over again, what we realize is as we see these plants in our landscape today, especially, I'm going to speak specifically about the Eastern Seaboard, we're looking at a habitat that has been so fragmented, so eroded, and so degraded that that's why those plants are growing there. Because it's getting a lot of sunlight, and it's eroded, and it's degraded. Until you change those circumstances, those plants are going to continue to do very well there. Great formula for us, considering that we like to cut down all the trees and create degraded, depleted soils and expose the soil to a lot of sun. So since human behavior has been deforestation after deforestation, and then bringing in these plants to do things like be living hedgerows in our fields, we've created soil regimes and light regimes that are selecting for these opportunist, dispersive, expansive plant species. Given that, what we want to understand is that we're dealing with soil and light variables, which means the best thing we can do to start to accelerate succession is plant the next stage of succession in the midst of the first stage of succession. So if you're seeing, first of all, what's easier than that is if you see a native tree or a native shrub growing up in the midst of something that's an opportunist dispersive, then cut the opportunist dispersive from around the native. So where you've got a native tree or a native shrub and it's enshrouded in something, a lot of times it's a native. Grape is a big problem with forest succession on the Eastern Seaboard. It slows it down dramatically. So you could get into this stigmatization and say, oh, exotics are what's slowing succession. In a lot of instances, actually, no, it's natives that are outstripping regeneration of forests because they're climbing up the trees and then dragging the trees down. Now, step back a little further and realize that, of course, it's a human agenda to try to switch up the pace at which nature does its thing. No, nature's going to do its thing. You know, in other words, look at a landscape, step back from human agendas for it, and realize that you will have a climax hardwood forest on the Eastern Seaboard if you leave a place alone long enough, unless it's a serpentine barrens on a ridge line or a wetland and a swamp.